Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we'll Masech the Zevachim Daf Tes Zayin. We're going to begin in the middle of Tes Vav Amid Beis, as it's a new parak. Let's see the new Mishnah. Kol Zevachim Shekibu Daman Zar Oinin Tful Yoim. So we're going to see that when it comes to the avoda, like we saw in the first parak, it has to be done right. It's not to be Shalol Shema, which under certain circumstances, the whole carbon is puzzle. Sometimes it's kosher, but it's just that the owner has to bring another carbon, but you can continue in the avoda. We also discussed the notion of pigul, having the wrong machshava, having the zvicha done, for example, after the proper time or the proper place. So here we talk about other improper actions, such as if, let's say, you did the Kabbalah Saddam by a Zar, by a non-Kohen, which we discussed a little bit already in the first parak, whether or not that's something which is allowed. Apparently here it's clear that everyone holds it's not allowed. Oinain is someone who did not yet do kfura for one of his Zayin Kroivim. A Tful Yoim, as Rashi says, the Sheretz Udameis Ushar Tumus, Shulhutzruchul carbon. Anytime that a person is a Tful Yoim, so you went to the mikveh, but you're still waiting for Erev Shemesh, you're waiting for Seitzer Kochavim, as the beginning of Masechtas Brachos talks about. So until that time, you're called a Tful Yoim. So you're lacking total purity. Mechusar Kippurim, like a Zav, a Mitzayra, they did Toivel already on the 7th. And they also achieved Erev Shemesh, the sun has set. However, they didn't bring their carbon on the 8th day yet. When Mechusar Begadim, if you have a Kohen Gadol, who's called a Mechusar, who's supposed to wear the Meruba Begadim, his 8 garments, and he's not wearing all of them. For the same matter, it's the same thing as Rashi says as a Kohen Hedjit, if he's not wearing the 4 garments. Shlo Rachatz Yadayim V'Raglayim. It's necessary to wash from the labor, from the kiyur, your hands and feet. Orel, someone who's an orel. A kohen doesn't mean that he just doesn't want to do a bris milah. He has a legitimate reason that his brothers died machmas milah, so he really doesn't have any obligation to risk his life. But nonetheless, he's an orel. A tameh, a kohen is tameh. Yoshev, someone who's sitting during the avoda. Oimid al gabi kalim, al gabi behemo, al gabi ragli chavero. Why does I have to mention all of them? Pasul. So if your feet are not mamish on the ground, but there's some type of a chatzitza between you and the floor, pasul. Not only that, you're supposed to do the avodah with your right hand. Therefore, kibul b'smoil, pasul. If you used your weaker left hand, pasul. Obviously, if you're a lefty, maybe the din's different. It's not so pashut. You have shim and makshus, you have a machlokas over there. Okay. All right, with that said, let's see the Gemara is going to discuss all of these cases. How do we know it's possible? Starting with a Zar. So, Zar Minolan, of course, we know a Zar, non-Kohen, is allowed to do the Shechita, as we saw in the 5th parak in Brachos, by Shmuel and Eli HaKoyen. Of course, we've said that in the beginning of this Masechta as well. But it's only from only Shechita, with the exception, of course, of the Shechita of the Paraduma, because it's Bedek Abayis, as the Gemara also said in the first parak. But other than that, after Shechita, from Kabbalah on, namely Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika, has to be done by a Kohen. The Tani Levi, Daber el Aharon vel Banav, Yanazru Mikachi b'nei Yisrael. So Yanazru, like Nazirus, is to be separated from the sanctity of b'nei Yisrael v'goymer. So this pasuk in its entirety, in Rashi, the Torah, or Hasholim quotes a very long pasuk. Daber el Aharon vel Banav, Yanazru Mikachi b'nei Yisrael v'lichal l'shem kachi. You should not disgrace or cause my name, my holy name, to be defiled. Asher hey makdishim li ani Hashem. Okay, and then the pasuk keeps on going. We'll just see that one pasuk. So Bnei Yisrael lamuti mai. When it says that the Bnei Yisrael, what's that excluding? Ilim lamuti nashim. Does it tell us that it's coming to exclude women So what's going on over here? So Rashi says, Gabi makrivim betumaksiv. Someone who is makriv while in the status of tuma, and it says right next to it, kol yishayikav mikol zarachem. So what does it mean when it says bnei Yisrael? So when it says it's excluding, it says Rashi, Karban Shalmi hu mamayit. Milahizer Kohanim al Tuma. The fact that it says that a Kohen is Zahir, that not to bring something while they're Tuma for Yidden, but maybe it's coming to exclude the carbon of Nashim. Namely, even though a Kohen may be Tameh, maybe he's allowed to bring a carbon for the sake of a woman. So carbon Nashim Batuma Karav, understand, who would think that that's allowed? Just why would you think, just because it's a carbon from a woman, that the Kohen would be allowed to bring it as Tameh? Of course not. So that can't be what's talking about. So interesting, Din, that the Kohen could bring the carbon of an Akum even while the Kohen is Tameh. It says Rashi, so he sends an oila, we know and an oila is a doirain, it's a gift. Kedesanya, as we learn in Masechta School, and ish Rabbi says of Kachavim, Shenoidrin the Darim, and the Davaski Israel, which again is a phenomenal thing, that we believe that someone who's not Jewish can adhere to the Sheva Mitzvahs Neyach, and of course be very holy and be merit a portion of what to come. Not only that, the Beis HaMikdash is not designated only for Jews. It's even designated for someone who isn't Jewish, who wants to bring a free will offering. They're allowed to do it. It's fair Gemara. It's unbelievable. So that's what we're coming to say. That's what the pasuk is coming to exclude. Okay. So hashda sits maratza, that sits itself when the kohen wears it. It's not maratza. Says Rashi al tumas oilin shemak she bikarbonai could go nitma hadam or chalev kederch shesratza al shel Yisrael. So the tzitz has the capacity to be maratza. The kohen gadol wearing the tzitz causes kapara, but not for let's say when it comes to blood or chalev, that if it was done improperly with a status of tuma, that it would not work. So diamar oev kachavim ben b'shay ben b'mezid l hurtza. It's not considered hurtza. So but tuma karav, how can, if the kohen is tamei, how could he be makriv it? So look in Rashi. Lo hurtza dechsev l'ratzon lehem v'lo lev kachavim. So when it comes to it being brought in the status of tuma, it's not hurtza. So then how could we possibly say the kohen could do it while tamei, right? So even by an akum, it can't become to exclude that. The pasuk says v'lo yichalu, don't profane. And Rashi says v'hazarim avheim yinozru. They also need to separate kedei shel yichalum, so they don't become profane. Limad al zar she'avad shechilu es hakdoshim upasul. It shows that Israel that does the avoda can be mechalel and pasul. Okay. So, how does exactly that answer the question? It actually demonstrates that it sounds like a zar could do the avoda, but it doesn't mean it can do the avoda. It just means that when a Yisrael does it, then we know Yisrael that when a Yisrael does the avoda, they will cause a chilul because it's not allowed to be done by a zar. A zar, it will be pasul. Actually, instead of learning it that way, we can now learn it from a Baal Mum. So, a Baal Mum, says Rashi, Shachas Kachi Kedoshim. Someone who has a blemish, who eats Kaddish Kedoshim, in which the pasuk says clearly, Mikadshi HaKadoshim, Imen HaKadoshim Yoichel. So, on this, Ma Baal Mum HaKayin, Shoichel, who eats, Im Avad Chil. It says Rashi, Dechsiv Mum Boy, V'yichal Es Mikdashi. So, a Baal Mum, what the Baal Mum, if he would eat it, then he ends up, Ma Baal Mum Shoichel, he's allowed to eat, im avad chil. But if he does the avoda, he causes chil. So even though a Baal Mum is allowed to eat, but he's not allowed to do the avoda zar. Sheinu oichel, of course, as non-kohen cannot eat from Kodesh Kodashim, so enu din shima avad chil. So that's the kal v'chomer. Malach by a kohen is a Baal Mum. He can eat, but if he can be machal the avoda, that we know, right? Because the pasuk says that beferish mum boy chalos mikdashi. So certainly, when it comes to a zar, a non-kohen will certainly be machal. Yeah, we said mal Baal Mum shechein asabo karev kamakriv. Says Rashi. When it comes to the kohen is a Baal Mum, so we say hamum poisel b'karban. Not only does it passel the person who has a Baal Mum, but also the animal has a mum that will passel it kadesh poisel b'kohen, right? So we see again mal Baal Mum shechein asabo karev kamakriv. It has the attribute, the animal and the person it's so bad a Baal Mum that it's an issue also on the animal, but we don't find that a non-kohen animal, right? So Tami Yochiach. So what do we see by Tuma? That obviously we don't focus on the person like the animal, right? It says Rashi Shein Behema Kabel's Tuma Machayim, because as long as the animal's alive, and the animal cannot be Makabel Tuma. Keshem Sharkayin Tama Machayim. Of course, a person could easily become Tame Mace, Tame Sheretz, but it's not shaykh for an animal that's alive to become Tame. That doesn't happen. Nonetheless, we see that Tame is not allowed, will be Machal de Avoda. We know that. Someone who's Tame is Machal de Avoda. So too, like a Baal Mum. So, but it doesn't mean, that shouldn't matter, the fact that a Baal Mum is an issue on the person and on the animal, because we see that Tumah is Machal, even if it doesn't have that attribute. So the din of Tumah, not only are you Tameh, but you can also transfer that Tumah to someone else. But obviously that doesn't work by a Zar. So Baal Mum Yochiach, that just because you're a Baal Mum, it's not like you're contagious, you're going to cause someone else to have a blemish. So nonetheless, it's still Machal. So again, B'chazur din, or Izek Kurizeh, or Izek Kurizeh. So we see that these two things, someone who's Tameh or Baal Mum, they each have a unique attribute. The Baal Mum, in that the animal also is a problem with the Baal Mum, and Tumah, because it can also transfer that impurity to someone else. But that doesn't really make any difference that they all have these unique attributes. Rather, Asada Shavashivahen, what do these two have in common? Shimus Harin, that there's a warning that they can't do the avoda. V'im avdu chilu, if they do, the avoda is no good. So afani avizar shehu musar v'im avad chilu. So therefore, that's how we learn out alternative drasha through a kal v'chomer that a zar is possible. So manolan de musar. So how do we know that there is some type of azhara for a non-kohen? So im ibn Nazru, maybe go back to that pasuk that it says the words by Bnei Israel, and that's a warning on a zar. So chil begufe ksivbe. So when it says chilel, it already says it in the pasuk, right? So again, so Rashi says v'kavachemer lamalach. We went through all this effort to come up with the kavachemer, but you have a pasuk that, as we already established, it says that someone from Bnei Israel, aka a non-Kohen, who's a zar, that person, if he does the avoda, it's mechal. So you don't even need a kavachemer. You have a pasuk. Rather, we learn out from the following. The pasuk says, "V'nilvu alecha v'shamru es mishmeres oil moed." You shall safeguard that of the oil moed. L'chol avodas oil, for all the avoda in the ohel. V'zar v'yikrav aleichem, and a non-Kohen cannot be makriv. So therefore, we have this pasuk, which is pretty clear that you can't do it. So ikol mefrach malasana shamash v'hen shechein luhutter bebama. So when it comes to a bamas yachid, at the time of heter abamos, so Rashi says, as we're going to see very late, the last parak, hazman v'hanaiser v'atami shavin b'zeh u'b'zeh. Now when it comes to these things, they all have they're equal. Both of them are equal. They are similar regarding these a small and a large bama. Dam mater mafalig umumin. Taimer bizarre shekosher bebama. So both a bama gatana and a bama gadoila, a zar could be makriv on such a bama, right? However, all these other dinim are not allowed to be by a bama. So again, shluhutter bebama. So just because we're trying to learn out the Kavachaymer, the Sada Shabbat to a zar from Tameh, but you can't be Tameh when you, even by Bama Gadol or Bama Katana. And also, a Balmum is also a problem. The only heter by Bama, he says, is a zar. So maybe you can't learn out the Sada Shabbat. And Rashi says, V'kroi nami muchi begidyain umenoyach u'shmuel shehikrivu babama. We find that there were multiple people who were non-kohanim, and they brought karbanos on a bama. Okay, so we see clearly that it's allowed. Okay, v'lo tema tamei yoichiach. So you can say, well, how about someone who's tamei? Apparently, someone who's tamei could makrav in a bama. El em oinen yoichiach. Actually, you could say an oinen. Apparently, what this is saying is that an oinen apparently is allowed to be makrav on a bama. So mal oinen shechein aser b'maiser. However, when it comes to an oinen, he's not allowed to have meiser, as we saw in Parshas Kisavoi. It says lo chalti b'oini b'meni v'lo chalti b'oini. I cannot eat it while an oinen, which is referring to meiser, which is interesting. By meiser, they're not allowed. Truma, they're allowed, but meiser is not allowed by an oinen. So we see maybe an oinen is more strict. So balmum yoichiach. That when it comes to a balmum, is a balmum is mutter, of course, in meiser. Balmum could even eat kachik kadashim. So v'chazar din lorizeh karizeh. So again, they're not the same. Balmum is not the same as an oinen. So a sada shava shemehen shumus harim v'chul. So we can learn out from this sada shava. So hachinami lifrach mal sada shava shemhem shechein lohuter b'bama. Again, you could still ask that same kasha. It's not hoter b'bama. Again, when it comes to a balmum, it's not hoter b'bama. And also, apparently, again, we're going back to the sada shava of a balmum and a tameh. Okay, but apparently, maybe also referring to an oinen is also not allowed b'bama. Okay, so Masli Rav Sama Berei de Rava Uman Leimulan de Oinin Asa b'bama. Who told you that that's true? Dilmashari b'bama, right? So if the whole reason why it's you slug up the sada shava or the pircha is dafka if an oinin tak is asa b'bama, but maybe is moter b'bama, and therefore that's a good sada shava that you could actually learn out with. I guess you can even learn from three things: from oinin, balmum. Does balmum and tameh you can't learn by themselves because they're asa b'bama. Zar is mutter b'bama, but if you could now bring oinin also, which is mechalel, but is also mutter b'bama, so it's a good sada shava. Okay, so that alternatively it could just be another sada shava. Actually, we learn out from Yoshev, as we saw in the Mishnah, that you mamish have to be standing when you're doing the avoda. You can't be sitting. If you're sitting, that is a problem. So ma yoshev shaychel, if you're eating while you're sitting, im ava, you could do that, but im avad chilul. So zar she'enu oichel enu din she'im avad chilul. So while you're sitting, you don't have to sit while you're eating. It's not necessary for you to stand while you're eating, but even though you're allowed to eat while you're sitting, if you do the avoda while you're sitting, it will be mechal. So a zar who obviously can't eat while he's sitting, because he has no right to be eating these things, obviously, right? Kutch or whatever. So certainly the avoda should be mechal. The abamal yoshev shechein pasal edus. So Yoshev is maybe more strict than when it comes to a zar, because the Masechta Shavuos tells us, it says v'omdu shnei anashim be'edim akosim adaber. It says there's two people standing, which is referring to the edim. You have to be standing when you give edus. So my answer is miyoshiv talmidei chachamim, which over there it discusses this as well, that when it comes to a Talmid Chacham, he's allowed to sit when he gives edus. Shebeis din choychin lo kavod u'moyshivin oisai, and they actually let him sit. So therefore, you want to ask the kasha, it's not good Kal V'chomer, because when it comes to a yoshiv, we're more strict when it has to sit down, but it's not always. You could stand up also under certain circumstances as a Talmid Chacham. Yeah, but ma l'shem yoshev shekain pasal edus. So within the category in general, there is a concept that you're pasal edus. Most people are. So therefore, it still should be a good pircha. So shem yoshev l'parach. No, you don't say it that way, because when you can still again come up with a Talmid Chacham, and therefore it makes it still a good Kal V'chomer. So if Talmid Loimer Parach, it is a good kasha. So Asim Yoshev Umechad Mahanach. You could actually learn out from Yoshev, and one of the ones we mentioned above, Yoshev the kasher b'bama Menon. So the kasha is, well, you could ask that same kasha. Well, a zar is kasher b'bama, so how do we know a Yoshev is also kasher b'bama? Menon Zamakra Lam lifnei Hashem l'shar sul lifnei Hashem lifnei bama. It's only when you're in front of Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash, however, not by a bama. So we're more lenient when it comes to a bama as far as being able to sit, also by a non-Kohen, and possibly by an oinen. Question 1. Eu dal dvarim ditnan shepoislin bezevach ksherim hoye bebama katana. So again, first of all, we said sitting, a zar, an oinen. And this is not said, but Rashi brings down here somewhere also mechusar begadim. Mechusar begadim, as you can imagine, the requirement of wearing the big kahuna, again, if a non-Kohen is allowed to do it. So obviously, if you're a Kohen who's not wearing all the big kahuna, obviously, it's mutar bizarre as well. Okay, it's just like an interesting point, but it's absolutely logical. TA 26. Lamadio of the zar mechal avoida zar avoida mekal kavachaymer miyoshev l'chuda ha'ikol mifrach mal yoshech shechin pasal edus. So we said that when it comes to Yoshev Talmid Chacham, a Yoshev Talmid Chacham is allowed. Again, he's allowed to sit during edus. He's not pasal for that, and therefore because of that you can't ask that kasha. Okay, fine. Which is question 28 or TV 20. Momandi Yov Dazar Machal Avodim Mekabel Chaimer Miyoshel Chado with a Pircha I. It's Pasal Edus. I wrote Malam Talmid Chacham Shu Yochel Lehayed B'Yeshiva. Beautiful. That's TB 28. Okay, so for some reason, Zion, I missed one question over here, the one before. Bahazos chatas oif emosle chayla ba machshavas pigol maskana. It's a hard question. Shtei girsus barashi umazat toli bechatas oif. Based in Masna. I'm not sure if that's correct. Okay, all right, that was in yesterday's now. Okay, let's keep on moving. So we have a few different limudim, but at the end of the day, a non-Kohen is not allowed to do the avoda, and if he does, it'll be possible. Oinin. So menon dechsiv, because the pasuk says, and let's get the whole pasuk over here. It says, "V'al kol nafshos meis lo yavoi," that you're not allowed to come in contact with any of your relatives. Or aviv l'imo lo yitama. You cannot become tamei to them. This is obviously referring to the Kohen Gadol. Umin the mikdash lo yetze. You can't enter into the Beis HaMikdash. Lo yichal es mikdash elokav. And if you do, then you will, as being in this case, you're memachal. So you're not tamei, but you're an oinen. So the min mikdash lo yetze, it says that he's not allowed to leave, right? The Kohen Gadol is not allowed to leave. v'yichalel. So what is that mashma? A kohen gadol who is an oinen will not be machal. What's the diak? Ha-kohen shelo, ha-kohen ha'acher shelo yatzachilo. However, if a kohen hedget, and he decides not to leave, then he taka will be machal. So that's the answer. Rabbi Elazar Omer Mahacha. He learns out from a different pasuk. It says in Vayikra the following. It says V'yadaber Aharon el Moshe. So Aaron spoke to Moshe, Hein hayoyim hikrivu es chatasam. This is the day in which we're makriv the chatas, the asoilasam, and the carbon oila, lifnei Hashem. V'tikrena oisi k'eile, and I brought them close. V'yachalti chatas hayoyim, and I ate the chatas today. Hayita bin Hashem, which is what Hashem wanted me to do. So says the Gemara, Hein hakrivu. So what does it mean when it says that they were makrivit? So ani hikravti. I, Aharon, myself, am the one that took the seir Rosh Chadashim, and I'm the one that was makrivit as a kohen gadol. Machlal the inhu akriv shaper. That the inhu akriv shaper is starif. So what do we see? That if in the event that they would have done it, then it would have been destroyed. Says Rashi, Hein hekrivu, Hein hayoyim hekrivu, Mechuvaso she'al Aharon, based on the answer of Aharon. This is, now, Aaron was actually an Oinen, because his sons, Nadav and Avihu, died on that day, and he said, Ataliman ma imr lo Moshe. You can learn this conversation between the two. Madua lo achaltem. He said, why did you not eat from this carbon? Shemu anecha hakrivu baninus. Maybe because your children who died, you're an oinen. Sha'oinenim al nadav avihu hu paslu lekach nisrafa. And maybe because your child died, you're an oinen, so therefore you have to burn this seir Rosh Chodesh because it's like puzzle. So Armul Aaron v'chi hein hakrivu. Are they the ones that were makravit? V'halo hedyotos hein u'besul avoida. Where my kids were the ones, and they're puzzled to do the avoida. Is that what it was? No. Ani hikrafti. I'm the one that did it. Shemarti livasas carbon ha'am. V'ani kohen gadol. U'makrav oinin. Because I'm an oinin, I'm allowed to do it. Machlal. The inhu carved the sharp sarf. That if Taka, his children would have burnt it, they would have done it, then it should have been burnt, because it would have been puzzle. So we see the fact that he did it is okay, because he's an oinen. Mashma, if someone else would have done it, another kohen, then it would have been puzzle. Rabbi Lezer, my time alomer mumin hamikdash lo yetze. So according to Rabbi Lezer, who just came up with this pasuk, why is he going out from the first pasuk that says only a minamikdash shel yetze, the kohen gadol can't leave, mashma kohen hedget needs to leave? Why did he go out from there? My time will umr mumin hamikdash shel yetze. So malach miksiv ha'acher shel yatsa chilil. It doesn't say, even though we inferred it, it doesn't say, but if you're not a kohen gadol and you do it, then it's machal. It doesn't say that. We inferred it, but maybe that's too much of an inference to be able to make to mamish pasel. So therefore, he doesn't like that possibility. Idach my temple lemer mehenik ribu. One he went out from Aharon and the Sirash Chaydish. Ksavar mimnei tuma nisrafa. He said that actually, because of tuma, it was burnt. Says Rashi, hayoim, it's still today. Holodayin yoimu, the day's not over. V'hainu asurin b'kedoshim le'echel ad erev. Since you're an oinen, then it becomes tameh. So it became tameh, and then that's why they burnt it. Mitoich kach iruba tuma ba'oines. So it's not because we're talking about an oinen, but it's because the person was tameh. Chadam imnei tuma nisrafa. So as Rashi quotes Gemara later on, that the reason why it was burnt was because of Toma. The Chadamim Aninus Nisrafa, because they're an Einain. They wouldn't be able to eat it. The Ksavar Aninus Lail Nami Aser, even at night it's Aser. They feel Nikvar Hames, even if it's been buried, okay, so that's how he would answer it. It's not because of Aninus, but because of Toma. You can learn out from a Kal V'chomer. Again, this is to try to learn out the din that an Einain will be Machal and will passel. So we can learn out from a Balmum. As we continue to test Zayin Mid Beis, when we deal with a Balmum Sh'oichel, he's allowed to eat, as we said, Be'im Avad Chilo. That's what same thing we said before. So an Einain She'enu Oichel, we know an Einain is not allowed to eat, because as again the pasuk says Lo Acholti B'Oini, so Enu Din She'im Avad Chilo. So obviously an Einain will be Machal. As we said before, that not only when it comes to a Balmum is an issue on the person, there's also on the animal. But now when we're dealing with an Einain, it's only by the person. So Zar Yochiach, because the Zar is only an issue on the person, not the animal. Nonetheless, he'll be Machal. There's nothing you could do about it. If you're not a Kayin, you can have all the money in the world, you can never make yourself into a Kayin. So Balmum Yochiach. So when it comes to a Balmum, there is a takana that maybe your blemish will go away eventually. Nonetheless, right now as a Balmum, it's a problem. So we see that's not the reason. So b'chazar din lo rizeh krizeh v'lo rizeh krizeh. So we have these two ideas. We have a Balmum, and we have someone who's a Balmum, and we also have a Zar, that we know that they both have different attributes. A Balmum is unique, that the animal also can become a Balmum. A Zar is unique, that there's no takana. So, but that's not the reason why, because each one has that reason, doesn't have the other one, and yet the law still applies to them. So we have to look at Asad Shavash Behen. What is the common thread between them? Shein Musharin, there is a warning against doing avoda while you're a Balmum, and there's a warning against doing the avoda as a non-Kohen. V'im av d'chilul, and if you did it, you're machal. So afani avi oinen shemuz v'im av d'chilul. So we're going to learn out from the Sada Shava to oinen. So heichen musar. So it's the same question we asked before. By Zar, where do we have any pasuk to warn us against this? Ilema, maybe you want to tell me, because the pasuk says in Vayikra, Umin hamikdash yetze, right? Which means the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to leave, because the Kohen Gadol could do the avoda as an oinen. Chil begufik sivba. So, but fine. But it doesn't mention anything about chil itself, which is the question we said. You can't necessarily make this leap that a non-Kohen therefore will be machal it. Especially that the Kohen Gadol can do the carbon as an oinen, but even Aaron, cannot eat it. He was not allowed to eat the carbon. Okay. Elwa mehen hikrivu, because it's from them, mehen hikrivu, v'ksaver mneninus nisrafa. And since even the Kohen Gadol can't eat it, so therefore it was burned, right? So that was the issue, because it couldn't be eaten even by the Kohen Gadol. He was allowed to bring the carbon, but he had to have it burned. So the problem is that when it comes to these items, there's no hutter mechloloi. So it can never change. It's never allowed. Someone who is a zar is never allowed to do it. A balmum, as a balmum, can never do it, right? However, a kohen gadol is hutter mechloloi, because we allow it. Also, there's a concept called tuma hutter b'tzibura. So even as a status of tumor, or as a status of being an oinen, a kohen gadol is allowed. So it's hutter mechloloi. So Tami Yochiach. So this is the notion. Tami Yochiach, that someone who's tummy is not allowed to do this, not allowed to, and it'll become mechalel. However, it is hotem mechloloi. So malatami shechein matama, but tuma is also strict in that not only does it become tummy, it can make something else tummy. Now these, so hanach yochichu, all the other ones will disprove that it doesn't. You have a Baal Mum, doesn't make someone else. You can't make someone else into a Baal Mum. Someone's a Zar, you can't make someone else into a Zar. So the Chazar din, etc. So again, Asada Shamash Hen, Shumas Harin B'chulu. So Ve'erach Mal Asada Shamash Hen, Shechein Lo Hut B'chlon. Again, when it comes to a Zar, Baal Mum, it can never happen. It's a Kohen Gadol, Mikarbin Yachid. So apparently it's a problem. So Shem Tuma Mia Ishtari. However, there is a notion of Tuma in general that it is mutter, in general. And therefore, because of that, it's not a pircha. Okay, let's look at question 2. Elu psulim hutru mechlalan, v'hechen hutru. So an oinain, it's hutter by a kohen gadol, because a kohen gadol can bring a carbon yachid, and tuma, as we know, tuma is hutter carbon but sibor. So all these two have this notion of hutter mechlalan. All right, weiter. So Ram Misharish Yomer Asi B'Kal V'Chaymer Miyoshev. So again, we're trying to learn different sources from our Mishnah that teaches the din that when it comes to someone who is an oinain, will not do the avodah, like a kohen hedget, and if he does, it will mechalel. So what's the kal v'chaymer? Ask kal v'chaymer. Miyoshev, ma yoshev she'oichel im aven chilul. If you're sitting down, you're allowed to eat. However, if you can't sit while doing the avodah. So oinen she'en oichel eno din she'im aven chilul. So an oinen can't eat as an oinen, right? Even a kohen gadol is not allowed to eat. Even Aaron was not allowed to eat it. So apparently, if a kohen would do the avodah, as an oinen. So no, mal yoshin shchein pasal edus. So as we said, well, 1 second, mi yoshin talmid chacham, right? Because a talmid chacham is allowed to sit and give the edus. So that's not a pircha. So mal l'shem yoshev shchein pasal edus. The general category of general people outside of a talmid chacham, that is a pircha. So shem yoshev v'leparach, that's not a kasha. It's not a pircha. The imtim shlomer parach, maybe it is. So asim yoshev. So you can actually go down from Yoshev and from one of the other ones from a Sad Hashava. Okay. Oinain Posel. So far, let's just recap what our Mishnah said. We started talking about that when it comes to doing Kabbalah or other parts of the Avodah, if you're Mekabel the Dama and its blood by a non-Koyin and Oinain, then a Zar or an Oinain, it's not good, it's Posel. So now we move on to okay, so we're now up to oinain pasal. This is referring to obviously kohen hedget. So Amarava lo shano b'carbon yachid. This is only by carbon yachid. A carbon sibor meratza. A carbon sibor is allowed to be done tuma, but tuma, as we said, tuma hotbit sibura. Kavachaymer matuma. Ma tuma. So what do we see by tuma? Shul hotamachlal it's a kohen gadol b'carbon yachid. That we don't make any exception for the kohen gadol to be able to eat it by carbon yachid, but hoter eitzel hedget by carbon sibor. But when it comes to carbon sibor, we are lenient because tuma hitter bit sibura. So anina shehuter mechlol eitzel kohen gadol. When it comes, so that's when it comes to tuma. When it comes to tuma, you're not to bring a carbon yachid. Even a kohen gadol is not to bring a carbon yachid. But you're allowed to bring a carbon sibor. So in Yino, Shehutim Echlol, it's a Kohen Gadol. We know that an Oinain is allowed, if he's a Kohen Gadol, to do the Avodah. Even B'Karbon Yachid, Enu Din, Shehutim it's a Kohen Hedge B'Karbon Sibor. So then certainly it should be allowed for Kohen Hedge B'Karbon Sibor. So we see, apparently, this Kavachaymer. So Mask Rabbi Bar Ilai will tutar aninos, it's a Kohen Gadol. Maybe you should actually say no, that a ninus for a kohen gadol should not be allowed when it comes to a carbon yachid. And you can learn out from a kavachimer that may not work. That only time a kohen gadol can do it is dafka by carbon sibor, but never by carbon yachid, even by ninus, not just betuma, but also by ninus. Because again, the notion of Tuma Hutter B'Tzibor is that, at Tzibor, carbon Tzibor, not by a carbon Yachid. So that's when it comes to Tuma. But maybe also when it comes to an Oinain, we should say the same thing and say that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to even bring a carbon Yachid when he is an Oinain. Uma Tuma Shohadretzel Kohen Hedge B'Tzibor, because when it comes to Tuma, we're lenient that Kohen Hedge is allowed to do it with a carbon Tzibor. Lo Hodaretzel Kohen Gadol b'Carbon Yachid, but we do not allow, when it comes to the din of a Tuma, for a Kohen Gadol to even be makar of his own individual carbon because he's Tameh. So a Ninus shel Hodaretzel Kohen Gadol b'Kohen Tzibor. When it comes to a Ninus, we don't allow, Kohen Hedget. A regular Kohen is not allowed to do the avoida at all as an Oinain, even for a Tzibor. So in a din shel Hodaretzel Kohen Gadol b'Carbon Yachid. So maybe we can learn out that an Oinain Taka who's a Kohen Gadol can't do the avoda for his own individual carbon. But Tuter Tumei it's a Kohen Gadol b'Carbon Yachid b'Kavachemer, which of course is not what we say, but you can learn out the Kavachemer to tell us that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to, at the time of a Ninos, bring a carbon Yachid. For that matter, but Tuter Tumei it's a Kohen Gadol b'Carbon Yachid b'Kavachemer. You can maybe do the other way around and say that a Kohen Gadol should be allowed to, even while he's Tameh, bring a carbon, which is not what we hold, right? He's allowed to bring a carbon Yachid while he is an Oinain, but not while he's Tameh. But this Kavachar maybe you could. Because Ma'anina Shul Huteretzel Kohen Gadol Kohen Hedget carbon Sibor, when it comes to an Oinain, we don't allow a Kohen Hedget to bring any carbon when he's an Oinain. But Huteretzel Kohen Gadol carbon Yachid, a Kohen Gadol is an Oinain could. So Tumah. Shehoteretzel Kohen Hedge carbon Sibor. When it comes to a carbon Sibor, when it comes to Tumah, we're more lenient because Tumah Hotebit Sibora. Edudin Shehoteretzel Kohen Gadol carbon Yachid. Then we certainly should allow a Kohen Gadol to be able to bring a carbon Yachid while he is Tameh. Which again doesn't mean that we do, but that's what we would say. V'lo Tuter Tumah Etzel Kohen Hedge carbon Sibor b'Kavachemer. And furthermore, maybe you would not allow a Kohen Hedget to even bring a carbon Sibor as being Tameh, which he can because of Tumah B'T Sibora. But a Kavachemer will demonstrate perhaps that a Kohen Hedget is not allowed to do so while Tameh, because Ma'anina Shehoteretzel Kohen Gadol b'Carbon Yachid. When it comes to an Oinain, we're lenient when it comes to Kohen Gadol. Shehoteretzel Kohen Hedget b'Carbon Sibor. We're not ever allowing a Kohen Hedget who's an Oinain to bring a carbon, and not even a carbon Yachid, even a carbon Sibor. So Tumah Shlo Hoteretzel Kohen Gadol with carbon Yachid. When it comes to Tumah, in which we do not matter, we're much more strict when it comes to Tumah. So it didn't show Tuter b'Kohen Hedge b'Carbon Sibor. So if we're more strict when it comes to the Tumah than a Ninus, then we should not allow a Kohen Hedget to be able to bring a carbon Sibor while Tameh. But we know that's not the case. Okay. So we have all these different permutations. Ella equal mifrach hachi v'equal mifrach hachi. So even though you have a kavachemer this way and that way, you can ask different kashas on either side. So chad v'chad teiku b'duchte. Each one stands basically in its place. Look at Rashi. Hilkach kol chada teiku b'duchte kiksivta stam. Just the way it is. Kishohutra aninos. Kohen Gadol, when we allowed a Kohen Gadol as an Oinain, Stam ben Biyachim ben Metzibur Hutra. It doesn't make a difference. A Kohen Gadol is always allowed as an Oinain to do the avoda. Doesn't matter if it's even a carbon Yachid is allowed. Nesra will hedge it, and when it comes to an Oinain, ben Biyachim ben Metzibur Nesra. So basically, we make it very simple. As an Oinain, if you're Kohen Gadol, you can do everything. Kohen Hedget can do nothing. Right? Ukshahutra Tuma B'Tzibor Hutra Afal Kohen Hedget. Ukshanesra B'Carbon Yachid Nesra Afal Kohen Gadol. Tuma Hutra B'Tzibor doesn't make any difference if we're talking about a Kohen Gadol or Kohen Hedget. It's allowed, but for a carbon, therefore the diak is only Tuma Hutra B'Tzibura. However, for a carbon Yachid, that doesn't make any difference. Even a Kohen Gadol would not be allowed to bring that because it's only Tuma Hutra B'Tzibura, but not by a carbon Yachid, even for a Kohen Gadol. Okay, that's important. Rashi over there, and of course we will stop there, but maybe we have another question. Let's see. Question 3. No. TA. So we just did TA 26. Okay, but Yoshev. Okay, so we said by Talmud Chacham. Question: Madua mechusar kippurim dezav kosher b'para? That's going to be in tomorrow's daf. TB 29. B'ma tluy hanidin emeshel limo tvul yom mechal avodim mechusar kippurim ad kan.